Spark plugs are normally discarded just because they have reached 10,000 miles or less. It is an environmental damage and a waste of money. Knowing these parameters is very important to avoid throwing them out in good condition. Welcome to Flash Electrical Shop. Our talk will be on important spark plug tips. In order to get the maximum efficiency out of the fuel, a very high voltage spark is needed. The spark is discharged between these two electrodes. The negative electrode, which is the one that goes to ground directly through the thread, and the electrode in the center, which carries the energy from the tip of the spark plug. Here, the air gap is normally around 1 millimeter. Just by watching the color, we can tell how poor or how rich was the mixture of gasoline with air. The perfect stoichiometric ratio of the mixture of gasoline with air is 1 part of gasoline in 14.7 parts of air. This plug should have been in a very suitable environment. It gives a slightly brown hue, kind of reddish to brownish. This other one is also within the parameter, but it seems like the temperature at the tip of the plug was very hot and it turns white because the high temperature causes all carbon particles to burn. These plugs were working properly. Specifically, this one has a large amount of carbon deposits. If we touch it like this, we can feel the carbon. The soot is the byproduct of a very rich mixture of gasoline. There is a lot of gasoline with a very small amount of air. These two show that the motor has been passing some oil. They have a shiny look. Instead of dry soot tones, we can see that they have turned bright, and this means that the engine is already passing oil somehow. It can be through the piston rings or through ball guides into the combustion chamber. The spark jumps between the electrodes like this. We are making a spark jump between the electrodes. We have extended the distance between the electrodes in order to see the spark. The spark always jumps to the nearest ground place. Even though we have opened the gap this much, the spark will always jump to the closest ground portion. We are putting it now back to approximately the original gap. It was sort of like this. To measure the air gap, this tool is used here. We see how many thousandths of an inch are there in the edge of this gauge when it is inserted between the electrodes. This one is set to 45 thousandths of an inch because right here it starts to get stuck. Spark plugs are normally discarded just because they have reached 10,000 miles or less. It is an environmental damage and a waste of money. Knowing these parameters is very important to avoid throwing them out in good condition. Selecting the proper plug is very important. A spark plug with no internal resistor creates radio frequencies that make the electronic modules go weird, generating random misfires and a very severe failure in the engine performance. We can see that this plug does not have the letter R instead of the letter N. The R means that it has an internal resistor between the input terminal and the center electrode. Now let's talk about these high-thread spark plugs used in some Ford pickups. Ford Expedition, Lincoln Navigator from 2004 through 2008, having 8-cylinder engines with 3 valves. Once installed, this surface here looks very clean. Eventually, with the carbon built up inside the combustion chamber, will cause that lower part to kind of weld into the place. When removing one of these, even a very small force will break that piece off the main body and it will remain in the cylinder head, creating a serious problem to remove it. We strongly recommend to look some expert advice before trying to remove this type of plugs. The flashover effect. That's what happens when the spark is jumping on the outside of the exterior porcelain. This is the inside porcelain insulator, and this is the exterior insulator porcelain. The flashover effect takes place when the rubber of the coil boot becomes hardened due to heat, wear, and age, creating a conductive path between the rubber boot and the spark plug porcelain. allowing the spark to jam on the outside rather than inside of the cylinder. These coils discharge a spark of more than 40,000 volts. Most modern engines have one coil for each cylinder, and instead of plugs failing due to worn-out electrodes, the misfires are due to premature wear of the materials from which the coils are made. Some boots cannot be replaced, and the entire coil has to be changed, but for some coils, boots are replaceable. In each case, a new plug has to be replaced along with the new boot and or coil. Before year 2010, many vehicles were designed with wires to carry the spark from a distributor. Wires also fail. At some time, the hot temperature will eventually break down the electrical insulation on them, causing the spark to break through. This is a spark plug wire boot that someone tried to fix with electrical tape. In this particular one, we can see here the damage that the plastic boot had. It made the spark jump from here to the metal of the motor block through this piercing. Now we will see this very worn out spark plug. This is the center electrode. It is already round instead of squared. Also on the upper electrode, the amount of material is already very thin. That is very important. It clearly shows that it should have been replaced earlier for preventive maintenance. Modern ignition systems discharge around 3 times higher voltage than what it used to be 30 years ago when the systems ran around 15,000 volts. Nowadays, none goes below 40 to 50,000 volts, allowing for an excellent ignition and therefore a better engine performance. We now have plugs with materials like this one. Here we have extended the distance between the electrodes in order to see that the two electrode tips are made of platinum. These small tips, this one here and the other one there, are made of platinum. This type of double platinum spark plugs can last up to 100,000 miles, while a normal copper spark plug should normally last around 25,000 miles. These traditional plugs have a copper center electrode and an iron ground electrode. They should last 25,000 miles, and quite often they are thrown away in good condition. Some mechanics that have no knowledge discard them simply because it is about time. That is wrong. The plugs can be removed, visually inspected, and decide whether they need to be replaced, or if it is the case, simply recalibrate the air gap and put them back on. We invite you to continue watching our videos, which are meant to share important tips to get the most of your vehicle for a better performance of it and save money in preventive maintenance. Here we leave you our instructions, and please do not hesitate to call us. We will gladly answer your questions.